So before we get started, we're here to do some begging.
We're here to beg like 1980s and 1990 R&B stars. Like who? Keith Sweat.
Keith Sweat. Yeah. Remember when we saw him in concert?
It was like the apex of niggas in linen pants, those little A tank tops, and Stacey Adams.
It's true. But it was a damn good show. And we were like we were in our 20s when we went to that show?
Yeah. And now
we're very young.
Now I wouldn't be mad at a fine gentleman in some nice pants.
And I can still appreciate the begging of Keith Sweat. But
Can we, like he says, he begs to your woman so you don't have to.
Exactly. But today we actually do have to beg.
We're doing our own begging, right?
Yeah. And you don't have to break out your linen. But what we do want is for y'all to tell us what you think about the show.
Yeah. So it sounds like work. I promise it does. But it's painless. All you're going to do is head to the turnonpodcast.com/survey and answer a few questions. It will help us give you more of what you love.
Yes, help us help you.
Yeah. Do we have on the survey, is one of the questions, do you guys enjoy Erica singing?
That is not one of the questions on the survey.
I feel like it should be. I feel like it should be, but whatever.
Just, if y'all give us a few minutes of your time, you can help us give you more of the show that you love. And all you got to do is head to the turnonpodcast.com/survey. Yes, please and thank you.
Come here. Get off.
Hi, y'all. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are talking to Trystan Cotten, pronouns he and him. Trystan is a professor, publisher, and entrepreneur, and he's currently professor of gender studies at California State University, Stanislaus, and the founder and managing editor of Transgress Press. He's published several books on transgender issues and identities, as well as on African American and Native women's cultural productions. He's currently working on a documentary film about transsexual men's experiences with genital reconstructive surgery. Thank you so much for joining us for our final episode of season 4. Wow. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's really glad to be here. Really glad to be here. Yeah.
Okay, Trystan. So as folks that like to talk about sex every week, we like to ask all of our guests, what was the prevailing attitude about sex in your home when you were growing up?
That's interesting. My mom didn't really talk a lot about sex, so we didn't have that conversation. Keep in mind, my mom died when I was 14, so we might have had more conversations as I grew into, young adulthood. But certainly, growing up as a kid, we didn't talk a lot about sexuality. And when I got my menstrual period, we didn't have a lot of conversation around that. My mother was like, here are these sanitary napkins. This is what you do with them. And it just so happened to you once a month, and it's no big deal. We didn't really have a conversation. I think my mother, sort of in a general sense, said, keep your mind open and your legs closed. That was the extent of what conversation, had around that. Of course, my mom also, when I was a kid growing up, I didn't watch her date a lot. So, sexuality might not have been a big part of her life, particularly once I came into her life. So it may be a number of reasons why that was the case. But if I had to do it over, I certainly would have a, much more in-depth conversation with my kids, certainly if I had sons. And if I had a daughter, I would want my wife or my girlfriend or whoever, the woman influence in my life at that time to have that conversation with my daughter, So I think that's really important.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways, my mom's attitude is what you don't know won't hurt you, which we know that doesn't make a lot of sense. But that
can be easier, right?
It can be easier. And I was not, my mother may have detected my mother, when you raise kids, their personalities, kind of what they're geared toward. And I was certainly a rough and tumble kid. I liked to roam with the guys and played football. And so I never really exhibited sort of, behaviors that suggested I might one day grow up and to be a feminine woman and a heterosexually identified one at that. So my mother might have also picked up on those cues, thinking, there's not a lot to, why bring it up if this child's not really, doesn't seem my child's particularly interested in that at that age. So it could have been a number of factors. Yeah.
That's real. So I'm wondering, how did you come to start Transgress Press?
So I started Transgress Press. We founded the press in 2012, but certainly the legwork and all of the organizing happened about a good year and a half before that. And I transitioned in 2007, and I became acutely aware of just how marginalized and ostracized trans people are in our society, and just how disempowered we are, and meaning that we have very few resources, very little access to institutions of power, and little capital. So, so it was a number of different factors that came together. So one was that recognition, and myself, having grown up in sort of the Black nationalist tradition, I had always been aware that Black people, at least in terms of how we think about survival in Black nationalism, is that African Americans, or people, anyone of African descent, wherever you are in the world, need to control two things. And one is economic power or wealth in our communities. We need to control the relationships of production and own the wealth, which we don't do. We know that here in a good bit of America, Black wealth is a tenth of that of white wealth. And then I think the other has to do with cultural institutions, or what we call building institution, or institution building in Black communities. So building schools that serve Black children's interests, to tell our history from our perspectives. It includes libraries. And in my case, something like a publishing company. Historically, in Black communities, we've, at least for 170 years going back in America, we have produced newspapers and some form of media to express what's important to us and to educate our own, knowing that white institutions, white newspapers and publishers were never going to do that in a way that was authentically representative of Black experiences. It would always be told from a white perspective. So, coming out of that tradition of needing to have economic power, needing to have control over the cultural productions in our community, I decided to start Transgress Press out of my own gifts and talents as a professor, in the sense that, I do research, I'm a scholar, an author, and an editor. So I decided to start this press for trans people, and to produce literature that would be more accurately represented by trans people, more accurately represent trans people's experiences. So a lot of the books we produce are by and for trans people and about trans issues, but then a lot of them are not. For example, some of them are by cisgender people. Some of them are cisgender heterosexual people. Some people are cisgender gay people. But in some way or another, they sort of deal or delve into the trans experience. Understanding the need to how institutions that serve Black communities, I decided to develop Transgress Press to serve trans people and our interests. And I came up with the term transgress because I wanted to make sure the literature that we produced was the kind of works that think outside the box, or think outside normative values, because a lot of trans people do live outside the heteronormative order of values, and some of them live within that as well. But just by nature of being trans, we sort of transcend, so to speak. We transcend that sort of heteronormative framework and way of existing. So I wanted to represent trans people, hence Transgress Press, but I also wanted it to be literature that forces, or at least encourages its readers to think beyond what is, beyond the everyday, and to imagine what it's like to be a trans person, to imagine what it's like to be connected to trans people, and to hopefully educate people about our lives. Because as you can see, we've been under attack quite immensely over the last few years. And it's not that trans people historically have ever sort of had a period in time where we've just been able to just sort of be who we are and not sort of look over our shoulder. But it seems that's much more intense now. The scapegoating of trans people, the scapegoating of Black people, the scapegoating of immigrants and Muslims, all in the service of reestablishing white patriarchal dominance and in some ways white supremacy, because that's really what we're engaged in now.
Exactly.
Sort of fight against white supremacy. And so that's I wanted that literature to serve people and get people to think beyond what you stereotypes that you see of trans people, and come to understand us and relate to us as human beings, and see that we in many ways share a lot of commonalities with non-trans people. But at the same time, we're a unique group of people who also need help. And we still have yet to enjoy the full scope of citizenship rights. And so we're definitely in a battle for our lives, along with other marginalized folks as well.
That's true. You spoke about how a lot of, what you're trying to do is to give folks some real insight into what it means to live, to be of trans experience. And, we read Vicissitudes on the show by Kim Green. And we asked you to come on because, well, first of all, y'all hit it out of the park when it comes to that mission, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, and we really want to kind of talk to you about how you came to bring that story to readers, like why you chose it. Like for us, we picked it because it features a Black trans main character and it's beautifully written. But we want to know what made you say, you know what, this goes on the roster. This goes on the list.
That's a great question. Well, like you said, number one, it's a beautifully written book. And when I first picked it up as a manuscript, I think I got through it in 2.5, maybe 3 days, which is unheard of. And I just couldn't put it down. It's really a page turner. It's long, and it's page turner though. When you get to the end of the chapter, you want to just keep going. Like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? The couple, and then there are other characters in the novel who have their own issues, and how are their things going to get resolved? Some of them are trans and some of them are not. And so number one, I really love a beautifully written book. And that just maybe goes back to my experiences in graduate training of literature. But more than anything, the book is bold. And I love a bold writer. I love it when people take chances and really take the reader out on a limb to see if they can push the reader to thinking differently about norms and values. And in that book, as you very well know, you have a Black trans man who ends up dating a cisgender heterosexual woman. And I thought that in of itself is bold to talk about in the sense of most people don't even realize that, for example, they could be dealing with trans people in their everyday lives and they have no clue about a person's history. But what I found particularly interesting is that their love relationship brings together two communities that we consider separate. And having no overlap. And so most people wouldn't imagine a trans man being able to date a cisgender heterosexual woman, or wouldn't be able to imagine themselves as a cisgender heterosexual woman dating a trans man, because you have all of these stereotypes consistently pumped out in the media about us that I think that's part of what contributes to people's inability to fathom a relationship. So I thought it was really bold to take that chance to explore what would it look like if a cisgender Black woman, fell in love with a trans man, unbeknownst to her, sort of in the beginning, and then to have that revealed, and what would that relationship look like? What would the negotiation process look like? And I enjoyed that particular trajectory of the book because it's very realistic. As you know, John and Morgan, they go through their struggles. They have their ups and their downs, and then I think. So to talk about other aspects of the book that I think that are bold, that hook into that, is that I saw the author as very much trying to get Black people in America to think about the assumptions that we have about queer and trans people in our communities, and to educate our communities about where our fears and anxieties come from. And so, in that book, there's a moment where the character Renee, who's a Black lesbian, ends up attending her mother's funeral, and then subsequently does something with her ashes that me, you, and Erica know would be, it's excommunicable types of behavior. It was really bold for her to do what she did. I'm not going to reveal to the audience because
especially among Black folks.
Yes, especially among Black folks. It's blasphemous what she did. But I think the author and the author took a chance to do that, right? Because something like that could really blow a book beyond the pale of redemption for certain people, for certain readers. But I like the way that she took a chance and did that, and it's beautifully written, so doesn't come across as just trying to step on Black religious traditions and Black heterosexual suspicions. There's a nuance in the way that the writer goes about teasing out why Renee does what she does, and I think that
felt true to the character, right? It didn't.
It very
did. Shocking thing that she just decided to throw in there. It felt like, oh, I see how she got here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's
exactly. And Renee is a very. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Erica.
No, I was gonna say I think that the book wasn't overly preachy. It wasn't like an after school special. It was just a really good story. Right. That you could learn from. And that was what I learned. That's what I loved about it. I felt like I learned even more about the trans experience, about this aspects of the trans experience through this character. But it wasn't like, and this is how we do this, or this is what happens next. It was just, this is a story.
A very special episode.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's very much what the author wanted to do. She wanted to accomplish that goal with the readers, that readers could situate themselves somewhere in the novel's characters and sort of go through this storytelling process and the way people's lives were affected by trans experiences. So I think, so it's because of those, speaking to the Black community, dealing with, very much trying to deal and educate Black folks around sexuality and gender issues. It was particularly important for me as well. And I think it's also, it's important for us too to support women writers and Black women writers. So I was on the market for a Black woman's text this year. I was looking for that, and we ended up publishing a couple of other women authors too. So this year we really focused on publishing women authors, and particularly women of color. So I think Kim would be quite happy that you got that experience out of it, Erica. And there are, the book really takes you through some of the issues that come up for trans people in relationships. So what happens, when you're a cisgender person and you're dating a trans person, regardless of, their gender identification, what are some of the issues that come up around how other people regard you and how you deal with that sort of thing? How trans people themselves continuously sort of have to manage our own lives. Some of us have to be very secret. If John, he's very secret in that book about his identity. He's not out at work. And so some of these are very authentic representations of trans people. And I very much like the way the author took the time with each one to sort of take us through and really peel back the layers and give us humanly relatable characters that we could like and not like, for that matter, and think complexly about. Yeah.
So we struggled. I think you were in on a bit of that conversation in the beginning where we struggled with deciding to take on this book because we really wanted to find books that were written by Black trans writers to reflect the Black trans experience. But we, after conversations with you and among ourselves, we figured, okay, let's go for it. However, it has been a struggle on our show to find particularly erotica written by Black trans folks. So can you tell us about the challenges that stand in the way of our trans siblings around publishing and getting their work out there?
Sure. And I think I take this, when I think about this, I think from an intersectional perspective. So I also think about the way in which trans identities intersect, the way we're trans, but we're also Black and brown and white, and we're differently abled people. And that was another thing I wanted to say about the book is that before I answer your question, Erica, I very much appreciated the way the author took time to integrate different characters with disabilities into the book, because I think that is that's first of all, I think disability issues constantly remain on the periphery of both the culture and the individual people's consciousness, and certainly in our society we don't make a place for disabled folks. And I think we're also not as well educated about the range of disabilities. So most people think of disability as someone who's in a wheelchair or someone who's got a cane, but they don't think about disabilities that are invisible. And some of those have to do with mental health issues, which actually comes up in the book, but also physical disabilities that people can't necessarily see, but that really impact and affect every aspect of your life. So from your work to your family and how you show up, if you're hurting all over, if you have joint pain, for example, it's difficult to show up for family, for children when you're in pain. So that was the other thing I wanted to say about the book. I really enjoyed the way the author brought disability issues disability issues and characters into the novel without sort of making it about that, or without it being so sort of obvious. She just kind of slides in and talks about them and the things that they're dealing with as any other character without a disability. It's just a normal part of their life that they do, however, have to manage in some sort of way. And so, but to get to your question about trans authors is, so I think about it intersectionally. Sorry, I'm having to wipe the sweat off. It's about 100. It's 106 down here. So what I would say about, I think there's a fair amount of trans erotica out there. Most of it is produced by white trans authors. I think that when it comes to Black trans people and brown, I'm going to throw Latinos in here, Black and brown trans people, and this may even be applicable to people of Asian and API descent. Though within those three groups, we have there are nuances as well in terms of how we deal with gender and sexuality and why we do it in the way that we do. For Black folks, I really feel that there's a sort of a double burden, or maybe even a triple burden. So it's hard for Black trans people to just be out and visible as Black trans people. So much in our own Black communities, so many, whether it's churches or community centers or sororities, fraternities, we still have a really reactionary approach to trans people. I think that trans people, Black trans people, don't feel safe coming out and being visible as trans people. And so we stay in the closet and we about who we are and about our past, because it's also important, though, as Black people, that we have connection with other Black people, regardless of the differences that we have, whether it's religion or sexuality or gender. It's still really important for African Americans to have that connection, because that's still home in a country that has yet to treat Black people with as full citizens. And so we can't just sort of wander off or leave the Black community and wander off into the sunset, because that means either being nowhere and being alone, or being in white, trans, and queer spaces where we also have to deal with racism, class elitism, and even mythologies about who we are, in terms of playing a certain role or performing a certain Blackness for white people. And it's aligned with kind of racist ideas about Black folks. So it's hard for us. We need those those connections. But I think that a lot of us are not out about that because, or we don't write about that because we can't be out about that. It would expose us, and there's so much to lose. I think on another level, Black trans people are politically and economically even worse off than cisgender Black folks and white trans people. The cost for us tends, we are higher. For example, we represent a higher percentage of homeless, queer, and trans people per capita. Now, certainly if you looked at it by population size, white trans and queer youth, for example, outnumber use of color. But if you think per capita by percentage, racial and ethnic percentage, we are at the top of having youth, and not even just youth, but just trans and queer people who are homeless, people who don't have jobs, people who are dependent on social systems for our existence. So I think that's part of it too, is that we don't have that kind of economic or the financial, what I want, the financial.
It's hard to write a book when you're trying to eat, right? Like,
thank you. That's a nice way to say it.
I was just saying that, like, writing is a luxury, being able to sit and write out all your hopes and dreams and nonfiction. I mean, write out fiction. I'm sorry. Write out fiction like that. You got to know that you're being fed, and that it's hard to write. It's hard to make up shit when rent's not getting paid, or you sitting on, you're unhoused. So yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I think you said it best. You got to eat first before you can write, and it takes time to write a good book. And I would even argue that's the case for erotica. I know lots of people like to put down erotica, but although, they're reading it on the back end at night and doing that sort of stuff. But they sort of like to, fronting is right. But a lot of, sometimes you talk to academics and they want to sort of marginalize erotica as if it's something easy. It's not easy to write any particular thing, especially if you want to do it well. And so I think that will be the case also, across the genre. It takes time and money, and it takes support. You have to have someone to work with. You need someone to read your work, give you real feedback. Sometimes that costs money as well, and I think it's part of the reason why also you don't see us writing our stories and writing memoirs about our lives, is that we're struggling, many of us, just to keep our homes. And now that COVID has hit, I think you probably see even less activity among trans authors in general, and Black and queer trans authors. And I could just say, for my case, for example, I have the money, I can sit back and write it, but then I don't have the time. I have to run a press. I teach full time, and if I don't do those things, then my if I don't take care of my responsibilities, those two areas of my life will fall. I'll be a failure at those. So I have to think about sort of hiring someone to write my own memoir. So I think it's a number. It's about visibility, not wanting to lose community that we need, Black folks, and not having the means for that matter, and even white trans people have the means to that, even though they themselves also suffer from transphobia and discrimination.
So what advice do you have for Black trans people who want to get published?
I would suggest that people form collectives, because you can get more done as a collective. And so in like writing circles, writing collectives, that's one way to do that. Is in that way you get support from other people. And if you do it with Black writers, then you get support, that kind of implicit support. Like Black people know we know our lives, we know what we're writing about. You don't have to educate us the way that, the way you would a white writer who didn't necessarily get it. So writing collectives provide support. They provide sort of editorial, technical support from other people. It's not just emotional and cognitive support, but it's technical support. I would suggest to people, think about publishing as collectives, not just as individuals, because a collective can come together and raise money to produce a book in a way that an individual has more difficulty doing that. So that would be, part of my advice for that. But then there's also the problem of dealing with the visibility. We still have to get over this hump, this barrier of what's going to happen when I come out publicly about being trans. What's my family going to say? What's my community going to say? What's my minister going to say? So that's what I would suggest in terms of Black trans writers. But I also think that there needs to be a whole lot more work done in our communities to educate Black cisgender people so that we don't lose our families and our churches and communities, so that we keep them and that we feel that we have their love and approval and support as we go forward writing these stories that are, very important.
Word. Kind of to that point, we're wondering, what do you wish that more Black people knew about gender?
That's a good question. Well, so one of the things I wish Black folks would know is that gender is fluid, that gender's more than just two genders. And this is something that we know not just from human experience, but we know that from looking at the animal kingdom, for example. We have certain animals, like, for example, seahorses, for example. Do you know that in that cluster of species, it's actually the male, the sexed male that gives the birth of the seahorse. It's not sort of a female. So if we were to try to take our human experience of woman produces egg, man produces sperm, and try to map that onto seahorses, we would completely miss the mark and would not be able to appreciate the fact that males can get pregnant in that particular species. So even nature itself has what we call a variance of sex coded genes, if you will. In terms of gender roles, nature is just as varied. For example, penguins. So the empire penguins, the ones that hang out up there in Alaska, I think penguins are really cute.
They are
cute. They are adorable. But, even penguins, the gender roles don't align the way human beings' gender roles align. So once for example, the female penguin gives birth, then the male penguin comes along and he sits on it and he wraps himself around it and incubates, waits on the little guy, for it to crack. But what is the female penguin? Well, they take off and they go sometimes hundreds of miles to find food. And they get that food and they store it in their bodies, and then they come back. By the time they get back, that penguin, that little egg has hatched, and that little baby is ready for that food that mama has brought back. So here's a case where you have you have a sex male penguin who engages in what most of us would call feminine behavior, but it's not engaging in feminine behavior. It's doing what it's been pre-programmed to sort of do genetically. So I think one of the things I would like Black folks to understand is that when it comes to sex and gender, the human experience is much more varied than what we think it is, and what we than what we read, or maybe people are not reading. Maybe people are just listening from the pulpit, or only reading the Bible. So nature shows us. Nature actually gives us a map for how we could be more open and live, in accord with one another, rather in discord. I'd also like Black people to explore something that's really important in terms of our sexuality and our gender, and the way that we respond to people who are not heterosexual or who are not cisgender. And that has to do with the trauma and the degradation that Black people experienced for the first 250 years of being enslaved in this country. The things that were done to Black bodies, Black women's bodies, Black children's bodies, were heinous in what slaveholders did, and it carries a cultural memory that's been handed down from one generation to the next. That pain and that trauma of having your 12, 13-year-old daughter raped in front of you, having your wife raped in front of you, not being able to fight back, indeed not having the ownership of your children if you're a Black woman, to have the slaveholder come and just sell them down the river as they please. And so one of the things I want Black people to do is to become more in touch with that history of trauma around our sexuality and our gender, which I believe that has over generations upon generations has sort of crystallized into this fear of anything that doesn't look like the white man's social organization of family and community. And that what that means is just heteronormative, mom, a woman and a man and a child. If you go back to our experiences prior to contact and conquest, and look at the way African, particularly like Yoruban cultures, organized their societies, the gender roles were very different from the way that white people understood and organized their societies. The women, for example, were held the power, because the women presided over the agriculture. And even though the men went out to hunt and bring back food, it was never enough to feed the family or the clan. And so African women have always sort of held some esteem and power with men in the tribe, in terms of decision making, in terms of power, and there have even been women chiefs for that matter. So we had in Africa a very different way of organizing our societies. In fact, sometimes, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but there's something called female husbands. I don't know if but this is a term in anthropology, and it comes from, well, it's one of those things that sort of you sort of have to pay attention to nuance, because we want to be careful that we don't sort of map homosexual Western values onto that as well. And so what would happen, for example, is that if a woman was, let me just take these glasses off. I'm having trouble with these. If a woman, she got married and she had a husband, and she brought a certain amount of property and value to the marriage, and then her husband that she coupled with brought value to that marriage. One of the things that was permissible in the society is that husbands could take additional wives, but they weren't necessarily wives the way we sort of think about conjugal relationships. And same was also for the case for the wife. If the family had amassed enough land and enough wealth that needed to have additional bodies to control it, to manage it, to use it productively, she could take on what we call a female, she could be a female husband. So she could take a wife. Okay, and this is an important part, I think, to sort of be, to attend to the nuances here. She could take a wife, and so she would get married, and that woman would become a part of her clan. And so together they would bring that land together, and it would increase the wealth of the family as a whole. And the woman that she married would also may have children, or she would give birth to children, which were seen as, on top of children, they were seen as little laborers. And when we're talking about an agricultural based society, so you have to have people work the land. Now, what that relationship was not, it was, as far as we can tell anthropologically, is it was what we call a non-conjugal marriage, and that it was not necessarily, it wasn't a relationship between two women where sex was involved in the way that we think about sex in Western society. But certainly there was emotional connection, there was nurturance, there was cooperative negotiation between roles, and support for one another. And this was largely because women were grouped together, they tended to live together, and then men tended to sort of live together. So in those societies prior to Europeans coming over there, we, people of African descent, we thought about the organization of our society in terms of gender and sexuality very differently. And we did not ascribe those kinds of negative connotations to two females coupling together in a marriage. It was a part of the norm. Mm-hmm. But, you fast forward to today, and we have such an intense homophobic reaction when we find out someone is gay, or we find out someone is trans in our Black community. And I feel like that goes back to the many years of shame and guilt that Black people experience under slavery. And then it continued. It wasn't just 250 years of slavery. It was another 100 years, because they continued to rape Black women, continued to lynch Black men, and highly ritualized, sexualized, symbolically sexualized lynchings. And there's a lot of pain around that, a lot of shame, and not just sort of shame for what happened to us, but shame for not being able to protect ourselves, our children. And so one of the first things African Americans sort of realized around the Victorian era, this is about 1890s or so, and this is when you began to see Black people openly embrace white Victorian mores of that time, is because it was actually a performance or a facade for staying safe in Black communities and not getting lynched or not sticking out. So Black people begin to couple up, get married, begin to, and a lot of this happened in churches. We begin to police. When I say police, I mean to surveil, observe, to chastise one another, particularly women. And this was something happened, mainly toward women, but also toward men if men were queer. But certainly if women didn't wear their, the dress long enough, or maybe if they were showing a little bit of skin, they were chastised by other women as immoral or what they call back then intemperate. And so very much in Black communities, the policing of Black gender roles and Black sexuality is intertwined with staying safe in a white country that will kill us all if we don't play by their rules.
Yeah, it's like the early acting out of respectability politics, right?
Yes.
And how that still plays through today, and it's meant to keep us safe, even as it robs us of our freedom.
Yes. Yeah. Great metaphor. It's a respectability politics. Yeah. Because the other thing too about that, Kenrya, is that we've always had Black, queer, and trans people in our ain't nothing communities, in our churches. Ain't nothing new. And Bell Hooks writes about this and talks about this, and so does other people. Barbara Christian, Barbara Jordan, sort of write and talk about what there was. In a Black community, everybody knew Miss Sally and Miss Annie Mae. They lived up on the hill. Mm-hmm. They came to church every week. They did their tithes. They were there for the picnics, and
they went home together at the end of the day.
They went home together, and wasn't no man around, and that's how they lived. Right, mm-hmm. That's your special friend, and that's how that's how that went. And so long as a person, and what was interesting about that is this. If as long as you sort of stayed within the confines of the Black community, and this is before people run around carrying rainbow flags and all kinds of things.
Don't be out about it, right?
Don't be too flamboyant about it, because there would be serious consequences to Black communities, right? You'd have some white night riders visiting your community and burning it down, yeah, we've always had queer people in the choir boy in the church,
the choir
was
director.
typically gay. The choir director, typically gay, and everybody knew. But long as, he didn't sport it out on the street, it was fine. And when I grew up as a kid in Atlanta, where you guys are now, I grew up over there by Spelman, and there was somebody in our community. I swear I didn't know it at the time, but certainly look back now, this person was probably trans. Certainly was a gay person, and we called her. Because Miss Rowland had been born, pronounced male at sex at birth, but Miss Rowland that was her name. We called her Miss Rowland, and she walked around with her flip flops on and her rollers in her hair with with her Daisy Dukes and her little tie, shirt tied up around it. She was doing her thing, and everybody like, hey, Miss So-and-so, hey, Miss Rowland, how you doing? And everybody knew about Miss Rowland, but nobody
respected her.
Nobody ever beat nobody. It was never like nobody ever called her out her name or anything like that. And we just all lived like a bunch of poor Black people over there in Spelman, just trying to make it along, together. That's right. And so there was no hate in that community around that.
Well, thank God.
Yeah.
So we asked you if you had any questions that you wanted us to ask you, and they're so good. So we're going to go through these quickly. The first one is, do trans people have satisfying, loving relationships? How do they find partners? And what are the challenges and rewards of those relationships?
Oh, that's great. Okay. So in vicissitudes, Kim Green sort of delves a little bit into that, and you get to sort of see in that book the melting of barriers that separates John and Morgan, and the deepening of their connection. And so I would say yes. I think trans people do have satisfying relationships. I think our relationships look a lot like other people's relationships, except sometimes we had the added pressure of dealing with things like surgeries or hormones or getting access to those things. Sometimes we have to deal with phobia and oppression. But I think, trans people, certainly people have children. I got quite a few friends who are married. They've got, 3 or 4 kids. Living out in the suburbs or living somewhere in the city. So I think very much so we have good, satisfying relationships. And then sometimes we have them, they don't work out very well. They go south in a minute, and then those are the ones you have to jump off. Okay, she's not for me, but maybe she's for somebody else. But that said, I also think that it can be a challenge, for trans folks to find partners. And some of those challenges have to do with the fear that we're going to be rejected. Since so many stereotypes about us out there, we're scared that the moment we tell somebody that we're trans, that they're going to say, "Oh no, it's not going to work for it's not going to work for me," or "Ooh, what's that? That's weird. That's queer." So I think some of that has to do with overcoming our fears, and just taking a chance. Sometimes just showing up authentically. This is who I am. This is my life, and like to know more about you, and giving people a chance, so I think, yes, we can have some challenges, particularly around that when it comes to our own fears and anxieties. Nobody wants to be rejected, for that matter, but also, the challenges of dealing with mythologies about trans people. And I think sometimes too, when people think of trans or transgender, that what they think of is a transgender woman on Oprah or Maury or something like that, or Jerry Springer. They sort of have this kind of stereotype over the top ideas about who we are, and may not even necessarily take a chance connecting with us if it's something like an online, if you're dating online or dating through one of the cell phone apps. And so we very much, I believe, have a little bit of extra work to deal with around overcoming the mythologies about us. And I think also being, when you're Black and brown you deal with those mythologies pile up. I was struck when I first started dating many years ago. I was struck by how many women reacted more to me being a brown man, a black man, than me being trans, which I think they, because you can sort of tell when people are responding to you, whether or not they're responding to you in terms of stereotypes or misgivings about people. So, and I date, women of all races or ethnicities. I don't discriminate. So I didn't find it as much with black women, but certainly when you go outside the race, whether it's Latina women, Asian women, white women, I found it to be, I found more stereotypes dealing with people in terms of, black men or, deadbeat dads, we're thugs, that sort of stuff. That was something more I had to overcome. Yeah.
Okay. So, what is it like for a cisgender woman to be in a relationship with a trans man? And how is it any different from being with this cisgender man?
This was another one of your questions. Thanks for that.
Was this my question?
Yes, this is your question. You like, that's
it's
hard.
Been a while.
I was like, okay, that was the professor speaking right there. That was the guy thinking of a test question. So my response is like, I don't even know what a cisgender woman thinks of, but I think, so I will tell you what I think as a trans man, what we bring to the relationship that women, regardless of whether their gender, sexuality, I think women can get from that. And I think that trans men are because we're different from cisgender men, because we have lived on the other side in some manner, even if we didn't identify with our bodies. Like myself, for example, I didn't really identify with the sexed characteristics of my body. I just sort of lived from the neck up. I certainly know what it's like to be brown and female embodied in this culture, and the sexism and how it combines with racism, the things that Black women go through. And so as trans men, we have an extra level of consciousness that women don't have to teach us about sexism and misogyny, because like we know what that's like. And many of us are you don't also have to you don't have to rope us into or convince us to get down with women's struggle. Like many of us come into it already geared up. A lot of us have already had that history. A lot of us have marched in the streets for women's rights. And so we bring that into a relationship. So sisters don't have to educate us about what it's like to be, what the hardships are for women and women of color. And they don't have to drag our asses into the streets and say, come on, I need your help. I need you to get out here and run interference, for me. They don't have to sort of do all of that work. We're there already when we show up. And I think that's something that women can appreciate. That's particularly women like your age and younger, or even women my age who've sort of grown up in the aftermath of feminism. And so you don't have to explain things. We bring an extra level of sensitivity and support for that. And I can tell you that the trans community is up in arms about this shit that went down in Texas.
In Texas, Lord. Yeah.
They're already organizing. There are trans women that are organizing. I can't really reveal it right here because there's some things that they're putting together to one of the authors of another book. Her name is Brent Tannehill. She came up with an incredible strategy for what trans people can do to help our sisters there. And so I mean, we are beyond angry. I mean, I'm livid. So, the thing is, so we bring the extra level of understanding. Now, I also will say this too. I know one of the things that women like to have with men is a better communication and a better open channel of emotional sharing and caring. And I think that a lot of trans men out there are better equipped around that, those kinds of practices and relationships, and say cisgender men who were raised to sort of be, independent minded and aloof and self-absorbed. And this is no knock against cisgender men. I certainly I'm thankful to my brothers that I've, connected with over the years since I've transitioned, who really taught me a lot about manhood and masculinity, and particularly Black men. But it is to say that cisgender men are taught to be a certain way. They are sort of their gender socialization masculinizes them in such a way that it can close them off from communication modes and good emotional sharing connections with women that trans men, because we've been around women. A lot of us are coming out of circles of women, particularly feminist circles of women. We already have that training. In other words, you don't have to train us. We come to the table with some understanding about our feelings and our emotion, and wanting to talk about those things, or and not wanting to run away necessarily, when things get emotional and difficult. So I would say trans men are better at processing, emotional processing, than cisgender men, who, for cisgender men, it sometimes takes several decades to go through life and have several divorces. Children are alienated from you, and somewhere in your late 40s, your early 50s, you start to clue in somewhere like, maybe the factor here is me. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I need to do some work on myself. And I'm saying this because I know an awful lot of cisgender men who have become alienated from their children and their previous wives and girlfriends, because they sort of acted out some of those old masculinist ways of dealing, with women, and women left them. And then after it happens enough pain and struggle, they can't take it anymore. They have to look inward and see. So I know guys who are going through that.
So you mentioned just a moment ago about some of the work that our trans siblings are doing to help Black women and women in general. What can our listeners do to support our trans siblings?
That's a great question. I would say showing up for us. So instead of being so self-absorbed or one-dimensional in the way that we think about our lives and what's a problem, instead of just responding just to those things that are in our lives that affect us immediately, remember that somewhere in your life you've engaged in one way or another with a trans person. You may have known that person was trans, or you may not have. I'm frequently, I'm struck by how often sometimes I connect with people, and then I'll get a call from them later, or an email or something later, and they'll say, "Hey, I didn't know you were trans." And I'm like, yeah. And so it made me think about how many people deal with trans people on a regular basis and don't even realize it. And so what we need is for our people to, next time somebody is standing up in a pulpit trashing trans people, or next time somebody's sitting around the bar or the pool table and they want to tell a queer joke or a trans joke, hey, intervene. Say, hey, that's not okay. That's not okay. Don't talk about people like that. And you don't have to love someone to do that. You don't have to like someone or a group of people. You just have to have a certain set of principles and a commitment to those principles to eradicate this society of that kind of negativity. I find myself occasionally, if I confront anti-Semitic, if I hear anti-Semitism, I'll let you know about it. Hey, dude, not okay, and wait to deal with the response. But then, and for me, it's an opportunity to educate someone, but it's also an opportunity to say, hey, that's not tolerable here. And I think sometimes people do continue to do that, engage in that kind of behavior because other people sitting around either laugh at it or don't say anything at all, which is sort of lending tacit approval to that. So, and I think this is, we've got to deal with, one of the things is getting to me these days is the murder of Black trans women. And these are not white folks that are killing us. These are our own Black people. These are Black men, cisgender men, many of them who are killing trans women. Because what happens in many of these instances is that these men are actually dating these women. Mm-hmm. They're actually coupled up with these women in some way, but it's on the down low. Mm-hmm. And they're afraid to be visible about it because they're afraid that someone's going to call them queer or faggot. They're afraid they're going to get thrown out of the man group. And so when something like that it is discovered, the first thing the guy says, "Oh, I don't know her," or "You got me wrong," or something, or is to kill the woman or to murder her, and that's a way of establishing himself as someone who's not only manly and capable of eradicating what that some people in our society call a nuisance, but it's also a way of distancing himself and saying, "I'm not queer. I don't date those trans women because I can murder one, I can kill one, so I'm at a distance from them." So yeah, it's like we've got to stop. This is one thing. This is white people are not doing this. This is because in these communities, white people don't come in these places. In some of these, where you see these women are murdered at, white folks would never step foot in those communities, especially at night. So this is something that that really pains me, and I want people to speak up and speak out about it, to call it out for where it is. But I also think that in a community, we need a certain level of compassion and engagement with people like that, to tell them, hey, you're okay. It's not okay what you did. It's not okay to be hurting people. But if you want to be with somebody, you want to be with a trans woman and you're a cisgender man, okay, it's your thing. Do your thing. And so and stop judging people and stop sort of driving people to these sort of extreme behaviors. But yeah, we have a lot of work to do, because the thing is like the women are dead and then the men go to jail. And so who's winning there? Well, white patriarchal capitalist society, that's who wins there, because now you don't have you have one less trans woman, to serve the interests of the state. And then you have a Black man sitting in prison who's going to serve the interest of the state through free labor. Yeah. Free labor. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's right. I'm wondering, what are you reading right now?
Oh, wow. You did ask me that last time. When am I? Okay, I'm actually reading an old book it's been a while since I've read it. It's called Transgender History. It's by Susan Stryker. And I'm reading that book because I'm sort of reconnecting and sort of re-illuminating my mind with the deeper history of trans people in the United States, dating all the way back to the 1900s. And what I like about that book is that Stryker also looks at trans history as it's intertwined with Black and brown civil rights struggles. And so there's a fair amount of material in there that links civil rights movements to trans activism in the 1960s, a lot of that which was on the West Coast. But I think people would be fascinated to know just how many people in the Black Panther Party and trans people in the 1960s were actually linking up together and creating street demonstrations and street protests for civil rights for both Black people and for trans people. And I know that there were quite a few trans people Black trans people who worked in the Black Panther Party in terms of serving those institutions like the breakfast program, the literacy program. So I'm very much refamiliarizing myself with trans history, and particularly how it's intertwined with Black civil rights struggle, which is probably sounds kind of boring.
No, actually,
They're fat.
Yeah. Word. Same.
Yeah. Oh, wow. You know, what turns me on every day is, I was thinking about this the other day, because I talked to a friend of mine I hadn't talked in a while, and I used to have a crush on her, and still do have a little bit of it, but she's dating somebody right now. And I'm really happy for her.
Okay.
And so it got me to thinking about how much I love smart, powerful women. I like women who get shit done. So I like them smart. That's what turns me on. Smart and sassy. You know, a little bit of attitude thing, a little neck rolling thing. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, that's hot. It just is. Every man's got his thing, what he thinks is hot, and that's what I like. I like smart and sassy, a little neck roll, and got a big brain and a big heart. That's what
not where I
turns
thought
me
you was
on.
going
So
with that.
sisters
Okay.
like the. I've been wired that way forever. A good intellectual discussion for me easily finds its way to the bedroom in a matter of time. Yeah, I'm wired that way. Who knows why? Everybody got their thing. Yeah. I mean, because for me, my mom was like that. I think it's because we haven't talked about my mother, but my mother is the reason why I'm here, why I exist. My mom imprinted on me as a child very heavily. As I aged, I got to see parts of my mother that, would come out in me depending on circumstances and context. And they say that you're attracted to your first loved object. That's your first loved object you experience in the world. That's what you eventually kind of put on a pedestal in terms of attraction. And so my mother was very much a very determined woman, a very, very smart woman. And she was a no nonsense, as they say, nothing to fuck with, and but yet very compassionate, had a deep heart and caring for animals and plants. And so that's the kind of woman I like. I like a woman who's smart and sassy, gets shit done. Also, though, has a little penchant for the flair and finesse, and loves animals, has a vision, can be extending of herself, can be nurturing, and strong at the same time. So I think that's it's they say men grow up and they want to marry their mom, and so you know what I mean. You're the married version of that. So maybe that's what's going on for me. I tend to be partial to Black women. I think Black women have more sass and sex, sexy thing. Black women have more finesse. I mean, Black women, they don't try to look alike. Most sisters I know, they have their own thing going. They're like, okay, I might try. I like that what you're doing, but I might try it this way. So they put their own little touch, their own little unique stamp on something. So it's one of the things I like about Black women too is that they try to be unique and really care about being individual. Whereas I see sometimes, and I won't call no names specifically, but other ethnic or racial groups, the women just all kind of try to tend toward the same, bouffant thing or a little bob thing, cup, whatever. It's just, no, Miss Ann. Nah, not working for me. So, there's that,
Word. So for those who want to be able to find you, let's talk about where they can. So on Twitter, you're at Transgress Press 1. I'm going to spell that out.
Yes.
TransgressPress 1. Right?
Right.
Dope.
That's us.
And
we're also on Facebook.
As Transgress Press. Why do I keep tripping up on that? And then your website is transgresspress.org.
That's true. .org. Yes.
Dope.
And they can find out more about books there, about authors, and about the press.
Sure. And then you're offering a special code for our listeners. If folks use the code TRANS, TRANS, they will get 20% off all books that they purchase on the site.
All books. That's been set up already.
Dope.
So if they just go on and print TRANS, they get 20% off any book. Yeah.
So y'all need to head on over there and learn some shit.
Learn some shit. Get your copy of Vicissitudes.
Exactly.
All of that.
I love it.
Yes.
I love it.
Yo, thank you for coming on.
This was the best.
Thank you.
It's always fun talking to you.
So y'all, that is it for not only this week's episode of the show, but for the whole ass season.
Season 4. We got to close out with
awesome
Trystan. So
awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank all of y'all for listening.
Yep.
Yeah. And don't forget to visit the site, 20% off. Love having you. Love. Thank you for having me on, and love being able to contribute and give something to your listeners as well.
Yay. Thank you. All right, y'all. This episode was produced by us, Kenrya and Erica, and edited by Ballistic. The theme music is from Brazy. Hit subscribe right now in your favorite podcast app and at youtube.com/The Turn On Podcast so you'll never miss an episode.
Then follow us on Twitter at The Turn On Pod and Instagram at The Turn On Podcast. And you can find links to books, transcripts, guest info, what's turning us on, and other fun stuff at theturnonpodcast.com.
And don't forget to email us at theturnonpodcast@gmail.com with your book recommendations and your pressing sex and related questions.
And you can support the show by leaving us a 5-star review, buying some merch, or becoming a patron of the show. Just head to theturnonpodcast.com to make that happen.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Holla.